Thank you very much for having me and inviting for this great conference. It's my second time here, and I will try not to repeat myself because many things in terms of Russian internet censorship were actually established a year ago, and it all started in 2012. First, who we are and why I'm talking about these things. As it was said, I'm an investigative journalist based in Moscow, and I have been covering the Russian secret services for 16 years. And in 2000, with my colleagues, we launched a website called Agentura.ru, which is a security services watchdog. And the idea was to make Russian security services more transparent, which was a very strange idea back in 2000, but it's becoming even more strange today. And in 2010, Irina Bragan, my colleague, and I, we had a book about the Russian secret services called The New Nobility. And we have another book coming up this September. This is the title, The Red Web. And this book is mostly about the Russian attempts to control the internet and what was the effectiveness of the system, of these ideas. So internet censorship in Russia is based mostly on 4 strategies. The first one is filtering and blocking. And we got this system back in 2012. And firstly, this idea was presented under pretext of protecting children from harmful content. Now we have 4 blacklists. The first one is to deal with websites, with information, with pedophile information, child pornography, etc. The second one is it lists the sites with extremist and terrorist content. The third one is about websites with copyright problems. And the most recent one, the 4th blacklist, consists of websites with calls to non-sanctioned manifestations. This last one was used to block political websites, and it was presented and introduced in January-March of 2014, and immediately Free Russian Independent New Media, along with website of Alexei Navalny, the prominent Russian politician, were blocked because of and put into this 4th blacklist. The second thing which is important is Russian system of telecommunication interception, which is very different from the approach you have and the United States have. And I'm talking specifically about law enforcement interception. I'm not talking about NSA and GCHQ because it's mostly about foreign intelligence used to be and should be. But the approaches are different in terms of how things were organized from the beginning. The Russian approach is much more direct. The idea is to provide direct access to service and communications of Russian internet service providers and any kind of platforms, from telecommunication operators to internet service providers. And there is some mentioning of the need for the court warrant. But the problem is that the FSB officer, and the FSB stands for Federal Security Service, which is the major Russian security agency. But the problem is that with the warrant, that the FSB officer should get the warrant, but he has no right to show this warrant to anyone. So the idea is he just gets this warrant, shows it to his own superior, and then starts interception with no knowledge for ISP. And internet service providers have no knowledge about what's going on their servers. They have no access to this room. They have no access to these black boxes of SORM. And basically, they don't want to, because if they would have this access, it would mean they have a special security clearance. And in Russia, it means that you have to establish a special department inside of your company, which would be filled by FSB officers. And nobody actually happy with this idea, and they try to know as little as possible about interception. The third thing is pressure, direct, straightforward pressure on platforms, both domestic and global. When I'm talking about domestic platforms, it's mostly about two things. It's about Yandex, the biggest Russian search engine, and it's about Vkontakte, Russian social network, which is quite famous, and it's a replica of Facebook. The pressure on Yandex started as early as in 2008, mostly because of the war with Georgia. Then, just after the war, two officials from the administration of the president went to the offices of Yandex and requested to explain them why, if you go to the Yandex front page, you see five top news, and why sometimes you can see news from the war reported by Georgian media. They were completely unhappy with that, and they requested Yandex to change the algorithm of choosing the news. Actually, the guy from the administration of the president, Vladislav Surkov, even pointed out to one of the media shown on the page and said, "These is our enemies." Yandex decided not to comply then in 2008, but the pressure became more and more intense. And in 2014, the situation changed. Now, if you look into the main page of Yandex, you can see that the choice of news is quite strange. It's not about facts now, it's mostly about commentary, sometimes it's judgments, sometimes you see that actually there is some sort of censorship in choosing this news. And the guy who was in charge of Yandex news department, he left the company. The second company is, of course, Vkontakte, and the pressure put on this company was even more direct. Pavel Durov, who was the founder and the chief executive officer of Vkontakte, was actually expelled from the company. He was very active during the Moscow protests in 2011 and 2012. He refused to censor Vkontakte and to close down protest groups. But by 2014, the pressure was really hard on him, and he was forced to leave the company. He was replaced by a son of the Director General of the Russian television company, VGTRK. So it was a very strong signal to everybody that we control the television, now our sons might control the internet. Now, what happened with global platforms? Well, here is a few words about Mr. Snowden. When Mr. Snowden landed in Moscow, Russian parliament immediately picked up this idea that maybe they would try to use his argumentations and his ideas to promote and to put pressure on global platforms. Mr. Snowden was invited by the Federation Council with the upper hand of the Russian parliament to take part in the special investigation of misuse of Russian citizens' personal data. He decided not to participate, but nevertheless, this idea that global platforms like Google and Twitter and Facebook misuse Russian citizens' data, personal data, was promoted widely inside of the country and used as a pretext to propose the idea of relocation of servers of its companies to the Russian soil. And this legislation was duly approved. And there is a special line inside of this legislation which states that the servers of these companies should be and should actually provide access for the Russian security services. So it's not about Russian personal citizens' data. It's about access for the Russian security services to the personal data of Russian citizens who try to use global platforms. Does it work? Most of these measures were presented in 2012, 2013, part of them in 2014. So now we can try to assess, was it effective? And well, filtering was introduced and enforced by Russian security services and Russian authorities, and many of Russian ISPs were actually fined for being not very cooperative or to be hesitant to install the proper equipment. But nevertheless, technically the Russian filtering is not very sophisticated. If you want to access the particular website which is blocked, you can use very simple methods. You can use Tor, you can use even Google Translate, that would work. And you can use some other measures, sometimes even Opera browser might help to bypass censorship. Communication interception. We all feared that in the new updated capabilities of SORM would be used against the opposition. But actually, very few people were identified thanks to SORM. And we don't see mass repressions. We don't see, I don't know, thousands of people sent to jail because their messages are critical, posting were intercepted by Russian security services and used against them. We have only one case with a girl, and she was briefly sent to jail, but that's only one example, which is completely incomparable with the situation, say, in Turkey. Pressure on domestic platforms. Yes, it was partly successful because, as I said, Yandex partly changed its algorithms, and they decided to register as Russian media. Some of their services now specially registered, and which means that they decided to provide direct access for the Russian security services for their services. And global platforms, that's the most sad part of the story, but also many of them decided to cooperate. Just a month ago, there was a report that Google finally decided to have a service on Russian soil, and Rostelecom, Russian national state-controlled operator, happily announced that now they have Google servers in a guarded facility of Rostelecom. The same thing was reported about eBay and PayPal. But to be frank, there is a special reason why this technically unsophisticated approach was successful. And this reason is war. We have the war. It's a real war. It's not the war with Ukraine. It is they call it information war, and the Russian authorities were very insistent that we are in the war with the West. And in this case, the methods and the ideas which the Russian authorities used, they are very sophisticated, and most of them, it's a combination of technical means with intimidation. We got Crimea annexed in March, and immediately Russian pro-government activists launched a website called предатель.net, which means no traitors. In a few days, Vladimir Putin delivered a speech, so-called Crimea speech, about the annexation of Crimea. And in this speech, he uses the very same language. He said about the fifth column, and he mentioned traitors, national traitors. The same day he made this speech, 3 Russian independent websites, I mentioned them, Yosh.ru, Kasparov.ru, and Grani.ru, along with Navalny blog, were blocked. A few days before, Roskomnadzor, Russian communication supervising agency, blocked 18 groups in Vkontakte, saying that these groups disseminate pro-Ukrainian propaganda. So in this case, you see that it's clear how the Russian authorities use technical approach with the direct intimidation. Pressure on domestic platforms. The expulsion of Pavel Durov was preceded by 2 letters he published on his page on Vkontakte. The first one was the request from the FSB to open and to provide personal information about people who took part and who actually commented on Vkontakte groups about Ukraine and Maidan. The pressure on the pressure on domestic platforms also goes to Yandex, and Yandex was forced to present 2 different maps of Ukraine, with or without Crimea, for the Russian and for Ukrainian audiences. And this example was followed by other companies. Pressure on global platforms. The Russian authorities insisted that now global platforms should, with no exception, to relocate their servers to Russia because they argued there is a special case about Crimea. And they said that ICANN decided to stop delegating domain names to Crimea, that some of people who live in Crimea have no access to Warcraft servers. And that's why this is a very good reason to say that now we have to have all servers of global platforms on Russian soil. Do we have any resistance? Well, in terms of global platforms, they are very secretive. They send all of them, I mean Facebook, Twitter, and Google, they all send high-placed officials to Moscow, but decided not to say anything about the results of these talks. So we cannot say that global platforms were very resistant. If we are talking about the internet industry, only small local internet service providers decided to resist. They helped, for example, to obtain the real black list of banned websites. And this is a source of information about what actually is blocked. Because officially, the blacklist is completely secret, ostensibly to not promote these banned websites. And that's why we have this information. We got also some groups of activists, and the first one is Roskom Svoboda, which is a project of the Piracy Party. They're extremely good in exposing the practices of blocking and filtering, and they maintain this a list of banned websites. And it's an astonishing thing, because officially the authorities say that we have only a few thousand sites blocked. In fact, it's about thousands of thousands of websites. The problem is that it's about that technically this system is not very sophisticated. We try to use URL blocking, combine it with blocking with DNS blocking, and it's mostly inefficient. Russian Wikipedia. Russian Wikipedia is a great source of inspiration for many of us, because they were attacked by Roskomnadzor repeatedly. It started with copyright issues, then it goes for some articles about marijuana, for example, and they resist bravely, and they given up not a single article. Journalists and bloggers. We still have bloggers and journalists who are brave enough to expose things about internet censorship in Russia. And usually, and actually, if you want to get this information, you can find it easily. You also can find, thanks to these people, you can find information what's going on in Ukraine. And here, I should point out that actually the biggest resistance we should be thankful for the network itself. The Russian authorities, as maybe you know, are very insistent to say that there is no Russian troops in Ukraine. We have only Russian-backed separatists. That's the official point of view. And all kind of information about Russian troops in Ukraine was suppressed. Some of Russian journalists were beaten up for publishing this information. But then something happened with the network. Starting in the summer of the last year, Russian soldiers, very young, simple-minded people, sent to Ukraine, started posting things and boasting about their exploits in Ukraine. It looks usually like that. This guy was posted on the border, and he boasted in this message that we just shot on Ukraine, and it's actually not about one message, but about many messages. And he's easily identified, and he was identified by Russian journalists. He was approached, asked questions. So actually, these soldiers, not activists, not journalists, not bloggers, but these soldiers, these guys who never thought of being critical of the authorities, they exposed the silence around Ukraine just because it's about the network. And the Russian authorities made a great mistake. They thought that if they can control the company, just like they did with Russian television companies and Russian media, they can control the network. And that proved to be a really big mistake. So what's next? We already have some early signs of the strategy, which might be used, say, today, tomorrow, next year. And this is something which connects with the Russian ideas, Russian ideology. We have a special terminology now, call it Ruski mir. Actually, it's a Russian world. So the idea is that we have a special community of people, Russian-speaking people, and the Russian authorities, the Kremlin, has some sort of power to tell these people what to think and what to do. And it goes not only for some ideological things, but also for the internet. As early as in August 2014, we got examples when the Russian authorities tried to suppress information beyond the Russian borders. A Russian artist, Artyom Loskotov, organized a manifestation, which was actually a performance. The manifestation was called For Federalization of Siberia. The idea was to mock the Russian-inspired referendum on Crimea, and just to have some sort of manifestation in Novosibirsk. But Russian authorities took this thing seriously, and Roskomnadzor issued a special warnings to 14 websites. And some of them were based not in Russia, but in Ukraine and in Israel. And some of them decided to comply, which was really astonishing. And some of them exposed this information and posted online with warnings from completely different country. What happened next? The next thing was even more astonishing. The Russian authorities sent a request to a very famous hosting provider in Germany, to Hetzner, asking them to take down some of these websites for publishing information which are banned in Russia. And this presents a really fascinating thing. It's something about Russian authorities trying to force the company based in Germany to do something with the Ukrainian media. And firstly, Hetzner decided to comply. Maybe they just didn't understand that it was not about, but maybe this request originated in Ukraine, I don't know. But, well, the scandal followed, it made a splash in the media, and Hetzner was forced to apologize, and site was not blocked. What happened next? It seems that Roskomnadzor was not deterred, and in January of this year, some websites in Kazakhstan got warnings from Roskomnadzor for publishing information about actually Charlie Hebdo. And the websites in Kazakhstan decided not to comply, but nevertheless it reflects what might happen next. It seems that the Russian authorities really want to control all information about Russia in Russian language. And maybe not only in Russian language. Because in December of the last year, Roskomnadzor also issued a warning to BuzzFeed and requested them to block a video posted on the website of BuzzFeed, something about extremism in Russia. It turned out that this video was actually posted on YouTube, and there was only a link used by BuzzFeed, and BuzzFeed has nothing to do with this video, but YouTube decided to copyright, and this video was taken down. So in this case, we are talking not only about Russian-speaking things, but also about English-speaking information. And that's maybe the most plausible scenario for the Russian authorities to take in the years to come. Well, many thanks.
Thank you, Andrei. Okay, and are there any questions? Great. Bitte aufstehen und nah.
Okay. Большое спасибо за вашу мужественную работу. Many thanks for your brave work. I have another question. I've heard that it's not just about blocking and about removing. It is also about farm style generating massive amounts of correct content. What's about that?
Yeah, that's, you're absolutely right. I thought whether I need to add these things, but I thought that maybe the topic of this discussion is it's about how the Russian authorities try to silence and to suppress information, and not about disinformation and the ideas of spreading disinformation. But you're absolutely right. We have few troll farms in Russia, and they are extremely active. And the problem with them, they are extremely active not only in Russian. They are also extremely active in English, in French, in Italian, maybe even in German. And it seems that the Russian authorities employ lots of people which are basically active mostly in social networks, spreading false information about what's going on in Ukraine. It's mostly about Ukraine.
So I have a bunch of questions, as usual, but one of the things I'm curious about is the SORM 1, 2, and 3, right? It's telecom, direct access to the internet, and then deep packet inspection with analytics on site, basically. Yep. Isn't this essentially the same as Kalia, where the FBI, for example, has direct access to the telephone switches of the telecoms?
Now, the problem is that, as far as I understand, if we are talking about Kalia 1994, the idea was that the interception is conducted by the operator, not by the FBI.
So the modern version of Kalia, the way that it works is you secretly can log into a Cisco router, and if you are the ISP, you can't even see the FBI is logged into the router, and they directly exfiltrate that data.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right about the modern version, but in the beginning, the Kalia was designed in a different way. The Russian approach was designed back in the 1980s, actually. That's the reason why it's so direct.
So don't you see that we're heading towards a convergence? Like the four censorship methods are actually also the four surveillance and censorship methods for the whole world. We see like SORM 1, 2, and 3, and that's like the early Kalia and the later Kalia, and then eventually it all converges on X-keyscore-like stuff in Germany, in Russia, and in the United States. And I mean, it seems to me that these things are sort of identical, with the difference being that the extreme amount of political pressure and censorship that's happening. But for example, the CEO of Quest was asked to do dragnet surveillance and was put in prison, in fact, basically for refusing. And so we see similar tactics all around the world. And I wonder if you could speak to how we can get access to these SORM boxes. Like, I'd like one, if you can get me one. And I'd like to reverse engineer it. And I'd like to find out who the engineers are who built it, if you could give me their names and photographs.
Well, I will be happy to give you the names of companies and photographs. It's easier. And we publish some of this information on Privacy International website. But you're basically you're basically correct. And remember that Ron Davids once called it SORM prism on steroids. So it's basically, you're absolutely right. And maybe, I think we run out of time. Or not?
No.
Do you have time? Okay, good. Sorry.
There's other questions anymore? Ah, okay, coming.
Yeah. Hello. Thanks for that. I've got a question. We have quite a big stream of distressing news stories coming out of Russia. I just wondered, on a very personal basis, what's it like operating as an investigative journalist in Russia? And what kind of issues do you face on a day-to-day basis?
There are two things. The first thing is maybe you noticed when I try to advertise my book, it would be published in the United States. It means, and my previous book, The New Nobility, was also firstly published in the United States, and after a year, it found a way to Russia, and immediately Russian authorities visited the Russian publisher asking questions about who actually funded this book, who paid money, blah, blah, blah. Maybe it was CIA. So the biggest problem is first to get your story published. And the usual way is to publish it first in the West, and then maybe some Russian media might decide that they might publish some pieces of this information in Russia, which happened, for example, with our investigation about surveillance in Sochi. We first published it in The Guardian, and only after a few months, some Russian media picked up some pieces of the story. But the biggest problem is not censorship. The biggest problem is it's not about that the message is suppressed. The biggest problem is that it seems we are losing our audience. If you want to find information about what's going on, say, in Ukraine, you can find it. And there is this peculiar thing about Russian propaganda now. It seems that this Russian propaganda is not intended to convince you into something, to change your mind. It's just, the idea of this propaganda is just to assure you in your presumptions about something. So Russian propaganda just meets the expectations. So the problem is that we are not in position to argue about things. We have the audience strictly divided. So we have the minority, which is quite, well, understand what's going on, and we have the majority, some say 85%, who actually support Putin, which already have established views. And they just don't want to listen to what we try to say. That's the biggest challenge.
Thank you. Actually, you almost answered my question that was mostly about what is the source of the problem, or was the essence of the problem? Is this censorship you experience inside of Russia, or is it lack of demand for your independent reporting inside of Russia? Because it's completely different problems. And in that context, my question, if any, to you would be how we can help from other countries. Because my understanding of the situation is there is no problem with such demand outside of Russia. And you might even have a golden time for reporting independent news in other countries. So here, probably, correct me if I'm wrong, there is not so much we can help. And in my understanding, there's nothing we can do about the demand inside of Russia, because that would be seen as basically intervening foreigners that know nothing. So if you could expand on that, thank you.
Well, to be frank, it's not the new problem. And we've thought of this thing two years ago and 3 years ago, and we think that maybe, I mean, my colleagues at Agentur.ru, we thought then that maybe the effective approach would be to try to make Russian stories international. For example, that's why we chosen Sochi Olympics as an example of Russian surveillance state. The idea was to show that, just as an example, we have this local situation, it's a case study of Sochi, but that might be used to show the world what kind of surveillance state we have, what kind of limits, what kind of techniques, what kind of procedures we have in Russia. And it's easy to understand that if we have these things introduced in one city, this practice might be already expanded to other regions or would be expanded in the very near future. That's why we published this story in The Guardian. And to be frank, my ambition was then to try to make the whole issue of surveillance more international. And I was asked a few months ago to provide a testimony for European Parliament to make this debate about surveillance, not only focused on the United States, Five Eyes countries, Western countries, West European countries, but also to add Russia, to add China, to add other countries. Because sometimes we have these assumptions that these countries, mostly because they are not so sophisticated technologically, they might be a step behind the most advanced countries. This is the biggest mistake. Just one example. DPI was first used effectively on the soil of the former Soviet Union in Uzbekistan. not in Russia. Because in Uzbekistan, there is no limits, there is no any kind of parliamentary oversight or public oversight over what might be used on telecommunications. And in Uzbekistan, it's a very good example how the totalitarian state might use very advanced technologies to spy on people. And now it's perfectly the case for Russia. So I think if we can have this and to make this debate truly international, that would help the Russian journalists to expose stories to Russia, because too many things are really connected. We have technologies which we buy in the West and we export to the West. I mean, surveillance technologies. We have practices which we import from the West and we export them. As the Russian storm is not only the issue for Russia, it's also an issue, for example, for Ukraine. Ukraine actually has the same system of telecommunication interception. And it means they have not only the same procedures, they have the same technologies. And that means they buy lots of this stuff from Russia, which is now not an ally, I would say. So it's a truly international thing. That's my answer.
Okay. Oh.
This might be kind of a naive question, but you said that as far as you knew, there was no real consequences to telecommunication interception in Russia. That's what you said, right?
No, I said that I don't have examples that people were actually sent to prison because their messages were intercepted by, say, SORM, politically motivated things. So it's maybe there are a few cases, but nevertheless, it's clear that it's not about hundreds of people.
So my question is about you personally, for your work. Are you aware of this, that you might be intercepted? Do you talk openly on the phone? How do you work under these circumstances?
Well, as I said, I started writing about the Russian secret services back in 1999. So I was there were few criminal investigations, and I was almost accused of disclosing state secrets. So I should presume that I might be constantly monitored. So it's I just got used to it. So I use some techniques. I use some things I was advised by my friends from Citizen Lab, from Privacy International, from EFF. Well, but they are basics. So it's something about secure chats. It's about not to use email based with the service based in Russia. This kind of thing.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, got time to...
Great. So one of the things that you said in your talk that I found most shocking, aside from the sort of slight Snowden bashing, which is apparent in some of the things that you've said before, which I don't quite understand, is that you sort of seem to imply that surveillance is all right when intelligence agencies are doing it in certain circumstances. And I wonder if I understood that correctly.
No. I mean, no.
Did you say that it's military intelligence would be legitimate surveillance, essentially?
No, I just try to have some sort of distinctive line between the law enforcement interception and intelligence gathering, because it just legally it's about different things. For example, in Russia, intelligence gathering abroad there is no legal limits for that. So, for example, if you ask me about any kind of limits for the Foreign Intelligence Service intelligence gathering, there is no legal procedures for that. Any kind of things might be used. That's my point. But my point was that even legally, the law enforcement interception in Russia, we should have these things like court warrant, etc., completely untransparent. That's my point. Of course, I don't try to justify intelligence gathering and all this stuff.
So would you say that the world you'd like to see is a world where this surveillance is actually not possible to do at all? Where the surveillance is really individualized instead of happening at scale?
Now, of course, I don't support any ideas of mass surveillance. I think it's just unacceptable.
So hasn't Snowden actually helped with making that a world debate?
The problem is that he asked his question and a year ago. And Putin provided a very elusive answer. And actually, it was used by Putin's friends and Putin himself to show that Snowden is completely free to talk about anything he wants to ask. The problem is that in Russia, mass surveillance is not the issue. The biggest problem for us is targeted surveillance. I might give you more details, but it's really very technical stuff. Russian surveillance is mostly targeted surveillance, mostly because of lack of capabilities. We have very big problems with databases. That's the first thing. My problem with Snowden is that he tries to pretend that he is not in Russia, he's just somewhere in some limbo. He never gave any interviews to Russian journalists or to local foreign journalists based in Moscow. He never answered any questions about his circumstances in Moscow. And in December, he'd withdrawn his own argument when he is secretive because he fears about his life. Because he said to the Amnesty International that actually he has no fear for his life, he might, well, travel free, and he used Russian Moscow underground, blah, blah, blah. But he was completely untransparent. Nobody knows what's going on with him. Nobody can actually understand what's going on. There is no real reasons why he keeps with himself in such strange circumstances. I might explain you why I'm so worried.
Is that really true, though? I mean, the U.S. government wants to put him in prison for the rest of his life, and the U.S. government is active with intelligence assets in Russia.
Do you really believe that CIA hit squads might kill him in Russian soil?
No, but I believe that they did dispatch a jet to take him from Europe, which was documented in John Good's film.
I'm not talking about why.
Great Escape.
No, I'm talking about his present conditions in Moscow.
Yeah, and do you believe that the U.S. government wants to extradite him and charge him with espionage? I mean, that's a very clearly documented thing the United States wants to do, and Europe will not give Snowden asylum, and the Council of Europe is even afraid to pass certain things that would help him. So why is it that you don't recognize that the U.S. government is a threat to Snowden? If even Europe won't help him, why should he reveal those things? I mean,
no,
isn't he under threat?
No, I thought we are talking about physical security of Snowden. And I don't think, and he doesn't think, that he's threatened physically. He is threatened, well, he has this danger that he might be extradited, but actually there is no cooperation in terms of extradition between Russia and the United States. It's impossible. Putin said it very explicitly. The problem with me, that nobody knows what's going on with him in Moscow. And, well, it's if this guy said that he's all for transparency, why he's so secretive in Moscow? Could you provide me any reasons for that?
Well, I think it's quite clear that he received political asylum there because he's under threat. And
so you think
the
there
US
are some
government
special,
canceled his passport.
It implies that there are some special conditions. Yeah, I don't like the idea of special conditions, especially if they are secret.
No, I don't think there are special conditions there, but it's quite clear the US government canceled his passport so he couldn't travel onward.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm not talking about why he cannot leave Russia. I'm talking about what he's doing inside of Russia.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear that he has operational security concerns, and the fact that you're bitter you didn't get an interview is kind of a petty, shitty way to phrase his security concerns. I mean, the reality of the situation is the US government wants to put him in prison forever. They tortured Chelsea Manning. They put a gun to the head of Bill Binney in the shower. Whistleblowers about the intelligence community in the United States
I can't understand how it might be connected
in danger, and Snowden is not an exception. Snowden is in fact the most in danger. People from the intelligence community would like to harm him. The state itself clearly wants to do it in a legitimized way.
What harms him now is it's a problem that he is accused by many, and I don't think it's actually the right thing. He's accused of being some sort of spy for Russia, which is absolutely crazy. It's absurd. But the problem is that to face this kind of accusations, the best thing is to just to be open, to get an open and to say what he's doing. And from my own experience, I would tell you why I'm so concerned. Because when I was under pressure from the FSB, and it happened many times, I found that the best approach to deal with this kind of pressure is to go public. Because the security service always implies that if you are ready for any kind of secret talks, they think that, well, the next thing, the next stage is just to find the proper key, the proper thing which would help to turn you and to make you some sort of agent. And my idea, my approach was always to go public. If I approached by the FSB, immediately I have some arrangements with news agencies to go public and to say, well, I was approached by the FSB. And that helps me to withstand this pressure. In his case, he was approached by the FSB, which was actually admitted by Sarah Harrison. He is provided with the lawyer who is actually a close ally of the FSB. He's on the board of the FSB. He's his lawyer in Moscow. He cannot speak English, but he's actually from the public council of the FSB. And Snowden just decided to say nothing about these things, which is strange to me.
I mean, it seems it's clear that you're under threat and you're in this situation. It's very easy to demonize a refugee, and I think that's a really shitty thing of you to do, and I think that that's really sad. And the fact that you're doing that here in the West, to me, is even sadder. I wish Snowden could come here, basically, to debate you about this, but that you look at a refugee who's under threat and you say that he's in some kind of cahoots with the Russian authorities is just bullshit, and you have no evidence for it. And the fact of the matter is he's under threat and you should support him. He supports your global debate against this mass surveillance and against targeted surveillance. It's very clear he wanted to start that debate.
Snowden supported my global debate?
Do you think that it isn't the case?
No,
that
of course
Snowden
not.
he's in every talk here. Every single talk, someone talks about Snowden. That is about all of us, all of humanity beyond national borders, and it's very important to recognize that.
I don't take your argument about what he's... well, anyway, we can proceed, but I don't think it's between us.
I think you both better talk afterwards. Okay. There's another question. Sorry.
Hi. Thanks so much for your talk. I had a quick question because you brought up the Russian information war, so to speak, pushing beyond its own borders. A lot of times we hear RT, for example, portrayed as just a mouthpiece for the Kremlin and a source of English language media outside of Russia. Do you agree with that view, and how do you perceive the role of media from Russia geared towards other markets and other countries?
Well, I think with RT it's very clear that it's just a propaganda tool. Yes, there are some issues that it's not. They tried different tactics from, say, the tactics which was used by the Soviet authorities, say, 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Then the question was, and the tactics was just to promote the great image of the Soviet Union, blah, blah, blah. Now it's more sophisticated, and the idea is just to give the room and the time for critical voices, which is fine, because, well, many activists of human rights organizations based in London or in the United States told me that actually it's a big ethical challenge for them, because they are approached by RT every day, almost every day, and they are presented with opportunity to voice their concerns about what's going on in, say, Britain or the United States, and they just don't know what to do, because they are not asked to, say, to justify Russian actions. They are asked to provide their analysis, their critical things about what's going on in their own countries. And this is a very big challenge. But you have to maybe to understand that if we are talking about RT as a product, well, the most important thing is balance. And when we are talking about, say, things RT broadcast about surveillance, well, I cannot find, well, examples when RT makes any kind of things about surveillance in Russia. There is no critical reporting about Russian affairs. It's not about Russia now. It's all directed against the West. It's a very, well, straightforward thing. It's very critical, but it's critical only of the West.
Okay, Andrei, thank you very much for your insights.